Hi, everyone. I'm Gina Minardi, and I'm a licensed therapist who got fed up with therapy. This is a one-woman show about my journey of finding the spaces between non-traditional approaches of healing. What I learned is that there's no one right way to heal, and you truly are your best resource. Therapists and healers are meant to support you on your path, but they don't have all of the answers. You do. This show is about the spaces between laughter, tears, thoughts, ego, soul, messy growth, and moments of joy. It's about personal liberation, inner knowing, and the tools that get you there. I will cover topics that make many of us uncomfortable and interviewing people who are willing to go there. I've spent thousands of hours listening to human beings navigate their life story, from rehabs in Malibu to homeless shelters in East LA, and now my private practice. It has been some of the most profound, painful, and beautiful moments in my life. Thank you so much for joining me. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Spaces Between. Today, I have the honor of sitting down with Dr. Whitney You, who is a high-risk OBGYN. And we actually met at a mutual friends retreat, Jen Pasteloff, where the two of us sat down and talked a lot about births and being mothers. And as I've talked about in the show, I'm becoming a mom, and it's all that Whitney really does is she's an OBGYN. So, but I'd also like to start with Whitney was unfortunately outside of the recent mass shooting in Highland Park, and it's a mile from where she lives. So her and I, before sitting down together, talked about what freedom means in this country. And I have two quotes that I want to share, and then I'm going to jump into what Whitney is feeling right now in regards to the mass shootings and the proximity of this to her and her family. So the two quotes are, first one from Abraham Lincoln: America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves. Second one is Malcolm X. You can't separate peace from freedom because no one can be at peace unless he has freedom. So Whitney, where are you at today after all of this? Those are big quotes. This is a huge question, and must feel so surreal that you guys were going to attend that parade.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's a very haunting experience to know it was so close to our house, that he was caught a mile from our house, that the parade was 2 to 3 miles from our house, that we were kind of smack dab in the middle of all of that. And in a very naive and admittedly privileged way, you think not in my backyard. And I can fully recognize that's a privileged space to exist in. And I do have some guilt about having that thought, but it's my real thought. And we live in Highland Park, is northern suburbs of Chicago. It's kind of suburban America. And we chose to be here because we believed it was safe. I mean, we're not even great about locking our doors at night. I mean, and so it's a shattering of a naivete that I took for granted. And for so long, I certainly, and we're going to talk about Roe, I've been fired up about that and felt political about that. And I'm actually not that political of a person, but I felt very political about that. And then this happened, and I have very strong feelings about gun rights. And yet I just kind of collapsed. Like I didn't want to even have the debate anymore. Like I just felt so defeated and tired. I just felt really tired and just really scared. Like I just keep my kids safe and I just wanted to keep my kids safe. And at this point, it's like, I don't trust that our government's going to do that. And so you start to get into, well, what do I need to do to keep my kids safe? And I don't have that answer. And I think a parent, as a mother, not having that answer is a very helpless feeling. And I thought about the fact that we were supposed to go to the parade because my son's a football player and he was going to march with his football team in the Highland Park high school football team. And I had thought about the fact that I would have him in the parade. I would have had my other 3 children plus a neighbor's child with me. And how would we have navigated that space of hearing, like, it makes me tearful thinking about hearing those gunshots and knowing that Zachary was in the middle of the street and this other cohort of children were with me. Like, how, like, I don't even know how one navigates that space. And I don't even know how we need to think about, like, we've gotten to a place where I have to think, well, how would I have navigated the fact that my children were being shot at? Like, how do I divide my attention and make sure everyone's safe? Is never a thought I really thought I would have to have. And so that's kind of what broke me yesterday, was when I thought about sitting in that scenario and like, how I didn't have an answer.
And I think, to your point, not even really wanting to engage or be politicized about it, because it just feels at this point like it's a sinking ship. And it's more about, you brought up earlier that quote from Esther Perel, which I don't want to misquote it, but what did she say about the security?
Yeah, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but I can essence of it, in that we can't have freedom without security.
Yeah.
He's speaking, I think, more from a soul standpoint. Like, we can't be free with ourselves unless we feel secure in our space. But it can certainly be extrapolated to the broader sense of the world right now. And I don't think that we can have freedom. Like, I don't feel like I have the freedom to go into big open spaces right now. I don't feel like I have the freedom to enjoy that. But to be sure, the people in parts of Chicago right now never have that freedom, right? Like, so again, I do need to take a step back and recognize that that's a privileged space that I exist in, that I ever thought I had that freedom. It makes my heart break even more for a larger community that I can't even begin to relate to. There just doesn't seem to be any sanctuary anywhere. And we've proved there are spaces of worship are not safe. Schools are not, like, the places that, like, if you were to say, what are the safest spaces in America? I would say sanctuary churches and schools. Like, that's where, like, if you ask me, before mass shootings were so common, where the safest spaces would be, I would say that those are probably the safest spaces I can think of. And there is no sanctuary. And I think for me, that just from a soul standpoint is, the lights in my soul just dimmed. It's like, I can't explain it any better. And the idea that we're destroying ourselves from the inside as Americans, I do think that that's true. And I think one side could look at it and say it's their fault, and the other side could look at it and say it's their fault. We can sit and point fingers, but we seem to be incapable as a country to even have a discussion about it. And so, I think we are at a place of paralysis, and I don't know how to, I don't have any ideas on how to fix that.
I think that's so beautifully articulated, that we're in a state of paralysis. And, you and I were talking about this before, it just feels like we're drowning. And so pointing the finger at one another is just, it's clearly we're not getting anywhere. If anything, we're just hating each other more, and we're more divided and polarized than ever. And I don't need to hammer these points because it's known in this country, but also to your point of, there is no sanctuary, and it doesn't feel, I was talking to one of my girlfriends today as we were going to a public pool, and I was asking her about it, and she said, yeah, I haven't felt comfortable. And I was really surprised, actually, when she said that. She works in the ER in Cedars-Sinai. And she said, no, I always, in large group settings, there's this piece of me that there's a paranoia that a shooting could happen. And we both talked about not really feeling comfortable being in movie theaters anymore. And I had a very close friend who moved to Portugal because she just didn't feel comfortable raising her child in American schools. And at the time, not becoming a mother, it almost seemed extreme to me, and in these days, it seems to make a lot of sense. But then is the answer, dare we go there as Americans? And again, pointing to privilege, do we just move? Do we just move and because we do feel like a sinking ship? Or how do we be proactive and active in times that are so polarized and pointing the finger and you're wrong, I'm right? It seems really, for lack of better words, I mean, for me, what comes to mind is it's deeply depressing. And yeah, it's just really, really sad. I mean, I feel emotional even talking about it right now.
And I struggle so much with the idea of coming to the table, complaining about something without a solution. I wish I could come and be like, what we really need to do in America is do X, Y, and Z. And I mean, I can tell you philosophically what I think we should do in America, but where the rubber meets the road, I can't make that happen. Like I can't tell you how to make that happen except to vote, which is a very important thing to do. So you can make it happen that way. But right now that just sounds trite. Like everything just sounds trite. Like it all just sounds like it's been said before and it's been said a lot. And yet here we are. And so it was just yesterday for me was just a huge moment of defeat. And when Roe was struck down, like that day I had a moment of defeat. And then I was like, all right, I'm ready to rise back up. Like we've got this. This is something we can address. I was sad, but I was angry and ready to fight this idea and ready to think of solutions and ready to talk about the nuances of it and what I think is going to happen and all of that. I got nothing, nothing. I don't even have a fight anymore. Like it's just, I feel awful saying that, but I've got I don't know, stop killing each other. Like it just seems like there's nothing to debate about that. Like just quit killing each other. Like, just seems really straightforward and simple. And yet it's the impossible ask right now.
It is an impossible ask. It is. It really is.
There's nothing philosophical about just don't kill somebody. Like just quit killing people in large. Like there's no philosophical debate about that.
Yeah.
And so that's where I just looked yesterday and I trust that I will turn around on this space. But I was like, I can't, like, I just can't, there's nothing even to argue about for me anymore. Like, cause it doesn't even feel arguable. Like there's nothing, like, what am I arguing? And so I know what we're arguing is gun rights. And I have very strong feelings about all of that. But that just feels hopeless. And we don't have hope, then like what's left?
I mean, what we say in the world as therapists is if there is no hope, there's not much. Yeah. And working in rehab centers as I have in the past, hope is everything. And the hope that somebody can change or somebody can become sober or, learn how to move through their depression or their debilitating anxiety or drug addiction, all of it. But yeah, it feels, as we're sitting here, it feels pretty hopeless. Or maybe it's just, I feel like collectively, I look at everything kind of from an individual frame and then also the collective energetic, as you were saying, like America has a soul body to me, and the soul body and the collective energy, it just feels really, really heavy. And I think everyone is tired. We've been through in the last, 2.5 years between this pandemic and raging fires and floods and Black Lives Matter protests and Roe V. Wade being overturned. It's just mass shootings. The list goes on. And I do wonder how we will stay afloat. So maybe we can just for a moment, as our listeners might be going, whew, but I want to be mindful of not going into like a fix-it space, or as you were saying earlier, like I hate not having a solution, But maybe it is also just about honoring our grief and honoring our rage and
Yeah.
just the dysfunction and the level and the state that this country is in. I think that's also hugely important as well for us to heal collectively and to really look at the trauma of this country. And that begins with systemic racism, that begins with our lack of importance with mental health and treating mental health and paying mental health workers well. There's so much, but yeah.
I mean, I can say that one thing that was really beautiful was seeing one, how people responded in that moment, and then seeing just the outpouring that I got, but not just me, but like our neighbors and my friends that live in Highland Park, like just across the country. I mean, so many people concerned and worried. And so to shine a light,
Yeah.
how loved, there is a lot of care and love in the world. And I know we cannot let one person who did something really awful change that. This is probably controversial to say, but I just make a call out for those of you that believe in energy or prayer or whatever. Think about this shooter's family for a moment. And I just hope that people can sit for a minute and just kind of send some sort of love or respect to them, because there's a lot of loss that happened yesterday, and those people will be honored and thought about in high regard. But there's a family that lost their son in some way because he will forever be in jail and will not be revered. And we don't know, we don't understand that circumstance. And there are lots of people who think that they do, but we don't. And they deserve love and care as much as anybody else who had a loss yesterday, and maybe even more so, because no one has their little toddler toddling around going like, one day he's going to kill lots of people and cause awful terror in the world. Like, that is never your hope for your child. And it's never what you want. And I'm sure that there's a suffering there that is not really ever acknowledged or seen, or at least not broadly. And so I think if we're going to offer compassion, I hope we can be globally compassionate as a community and as a world, and also care for them, because they deserve that too.
God, but you bring up something, it is, I think, the missing key, actually, that now that we come kind of full circle, is our compassion and our empathy. And I think as a country these days, again, because we're so pitted against each other, and we're, and villainizing everyone, but seeing the compassion and the empathy and having, for this family. I mean, I can't even imagine, Yeah. So it's something we have to work on. I mean, it's why I'm a huge proponent in schools that we need to be teaching children about empathy and compassion and, developing our emotional intelligence, which I think to a degree, I'm going to be bold when I say this, is lacking in this country. I really do think that there is kind of there's a missing link there. There's a lot of righteousness. There's a lot of black and white thinking. I liken it almost to a teenage brain. That's just, the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, and we're trying to get there, but it just feels like, woof, I don't know. Skills like self-regulation, soothing, compassion, the sacred pause, everything that happens with that, frontal development is not really happening. So, yeah. But so if I was to segue but I think it's very, very interesting because, you and I could have done this interview before the Highland Park shooting, and just the proximity to it in your life and that potential of going, and how surreal it is for you. Yeah. How are you feeling about the overturn of Roe v. Wade? And it is interesting also for us to look at how guns do have quite a bit of rights in this country, and women right now, we're really, it's not the same. So any thoughts or feelings about that? I'm going to pause myself.
I might have some. I think the overturn of Roe v. Wade scares me. So, I mean, I remember when it was being discussed that it could get overturned, and it was like, it just felt impossible. Like that cannot happen. We cannot go backwards in that way. That cannot happen. And I'm speechless. So I'm terrified of what it means for us. And I'm frustrated on how it's being interpreted in some ways. And I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated and I'm terrified. But that's a place where I feel like I have more agency, and I feel like I am better educated about it. I have better understanding about it. And it's a space that I live, right? Like, I mean, part of my job is offering abortion services to women and, or to pregnant people, I should say. And so that, and talking to families about that option. And so that, I mean, that's a field in which I can walk and have some understanding of and navigate it a little bit versus gun rights and whatnot. So, but yeah, in a word, I'm terrified.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What do you think? There's a couple things that I want to piggyback on with you is, you said, I'm frustrated with how it's been interpreted, right? And a lot of the arguments that I hear going back and forth between people about what this really means, what's going to happen for you. What do you feel are going to be the real ramifications of this? Because I will just for a second speak for myself, where when people come at me with different debates around it, or, it's really, Gina, it's a larger conversation about when the soul enters the fetus and when a life is a life. And for myself, and maybe this is really black and white thinking, but what it boils down to for me is legal and safe access to abortions for pregnant women. Mm-hmm. And if that's not available, then women will die. And it's not going to be in populations of privileged women. And I think that is going to be the more underserved. So anyways, I didn't mean to give my own, but what do you feel the ramifications of this and the true, what are your frustrations when you hear people argue about this or kind of go, well, the overturn really means this, but what does it really mean to someone like you who this is your world? This is what you do.
Yeah. I mean, for me, from an operational standpoint in my day-to-day life, it doesn't change a lot because Illinois that's still an option in Illinois and will likely stay an option in Illinois. And I'm really grateful for that. I don't know what that means from an influx standpoint. I don't know if we're going to be seeing, and I probably in my own personal practice, because primarily what I do is not talk to people about abortion services. It's a tool for us, right? Like we talk to women who have conceived and then are able to offer them that service, but people don't come to me seeking abortion care. So I don't know that I'm going to see a massive influx, but I do wonder if Illinois is going to see a massive influx. So just purely from like a day-to-day life standpoint, not a lot changes for me, except for I think that the volume in Illinois may change. I think it means so many different things for so many different people in so many different states. Like, I think that's part of the problem is it just suddenly feels so chaotic. Like, what does this state say? What does this state say? What is this? Like, it just feels very chaotic in some ways. And you hit the nail on the head of who this is going to affect. It's not just a abortion issue. It's a human rights issue. It's an equity issue. And so, sorry, you're going to hear maybe like singing children in the background.
Okay.
But you're right. The privileged in America probably won't affect them as much. It probably will still affect them on some level, but it's the people who have reproductive potential of color, who are under resourced, who have mental illness, who are potentially in the military, who rely on any sort of public funding, like they are, or especially federal funding, are really going to be affected by this. And so I think that we're going to see women of color already are dying in childbirth more than the general population from an equity standpoint. And so, or disproportionate, I should say more than general population, but from disproportionately dying within the general population, from an equity standpoint. And now they aren't going to have choices when it comes to childbirth. And so I'm very, very concerned about what this means for them. Because they're going to be disproportionately affected by this. But I'm concerned too, in the fact that you brought up a really interesting thing about, or point about, when does life happen? And we don't have a definition of that. So it's a space where we lack a lot of definitions. We haven't even defined what an abortion is. Like, is it stopping implantation? Is it once implantations occurred, but before there's a heartbeat? Is it only once there's a heartbeat? Is it only after this many weeks that we are concerned about abortion? Is it preventing pregnancy? Are we going to start to go into that space? Are people going to start to equate those two, which they are not the same thing? But there's the medical term abortion, there's the political term abortion, and those have now starting to get conjoined, and people are having a hard time disarticulating those. And we don't have definitions for when a mother's life is at risk. So for instance, any woman is safer not pregnant than pregnant, period. It is a safer state to be not pregnant than it is to be pregnant. So just being pregnant alone puts a woman's life at risk. So could I walk in and be like, well, you said if a woman's life is at risk, then abortion is an option. I would tell you that her just being pregnant alone is putting her life at risk. And I think that people would say, who are for fetal rights, then they would say, no, that's not putting a woman's life at risk enough. And then, okay, well, she can only get certain treatment to treat cancer if she's not pregnant without aborting her pregnancy. So is that putting her life at risk? Okay, well, there's a 50% chance she's going to die in her pregnancy. Is that putting her life at risk? Like, who defines that a woman's life is at risk? So there's a lot of definition issues that we haven't even started to work out yet. And I don't know that we will work them out. I don't know who makes those definitions, and who makes those definitions at 2 a.m. when someone comes in hemorrhaging or infected or requires some sort of treatment that also involves aborting the pregnancy. So who does someone call in the middle of the night to help make those decisions, to make sure that woman doesn't go to jail, and to make sure that doctor doesn't go to jail or get severely penalized? And none of that's been worked out or is understood. And it's different for every state, and it's probably different for every hospital. And I think the fact that we can't even define the issue is problem number one.
Problem number one. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's different too, right? There's the political debate, and then there's the moral debate.
Yeah.
Law debate, and there's the moral debate, I should say. So should abortion be legal? And then should people have abortions? And so I think there are plenty of people in the world that would say, you know what, don't love the idea of abortion, that they personally would not have one, or they don't necessarily believe in it from a moral standpoint, but can walk in and say, but from a legal standpoint, I can get behind it. They're two different debates. Mm-hmm. Again, there's another place where we can't seem to divorce the two. Mm-hmm. And we seem to gets really muddy really fast, and we can't separate out the two because they're two different discussions. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Whether abortion is right or wrong is one thing, but whether you think women should have access, or pregnant people should have access to abortion, is a whole other discussion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what also comes up for me is, in a country where we don't have great sex education or discussion of boundaries in sexual relationships with young children, and just an openness and a really healthy approach to sexuality, to not have this option for me. And I talked about it, and I'm going to speak personally. I talked about it in the podcast episode before. This really does feel, for lack of me wanting to, I don't want to get divisive, but it feels like a direct attack on women's power and us being empowered with our bodies, and, making choices for ourselves. And that is the problematic area for me, that it just, I do believe, and this is a bigger debate, but we're a country that's also very terrified of women being in their power and really owning, okay, what is good for me? What is good for my life? And as I talked about in the episode before, as a therapist, I've walked so many women through abortions. And I had one client she blew me away. And she said, what's so hard, Gina, even sometimes when I listen to, really like rah, pro-choice individuals and people protesting, that it's like this really easy thing that I just go, yeah, like I'm going to go get an abortion and this is what I want to do. And it's my body, my choice. And she said, yes, that's it. But also she goes, the nuances and the gray area of the guilt and the shame that I had to make that decision for myself, that I wasn't ready to be a mother. But again, making that empowered decision and knowing that it was right for me at the stage in my life, but still needing to grieve that. And not that it's not black and white. It's not. But at the same time, I very strongly believe that, it should be legal and there should be access to it. So, yeah.
Well, let's think about the fact you brought up so many points in just that story alone that can be talked about and thought about. One is the shame that you were talking about that she felt. So 1 in 5 women in America have had an abortion. 1 in 5, 20%. And I think if you just walked down the street and said, okay, how many people, raise your hand if you've had an abortion, I think we would be shocked to see the number of women that raised their hand. Shocked. And part of that, there's a wonderful book called Scarlet A by a woman named Katie Watson. It's a wonderfully written book about the ethics and law of ordinary abortion. So not abortion when someone has a mother's life is at risk or when there's a fetal anomaly. She just calls it ordinary abortion. Just one in part to destigmatize it. It's just an ordinary thing. It is healthcare. But the other component she talks about is the prevalence paradox. So this idea that when people hear that 20% of women, 1 in 5 women have had an abortion, it can be a very shocking number. And the reason why we aren't aware of it, that it's so common, is because no one talks about it. And then because no one talks about it, then we don't understand how common it is, which makes people not want to talk about it. And so it becomes this like vortex of shame and secrecy that imagine if all the women who had an abortion, like just talked about it. That's not to tell anybody what they should or should not do. It's just saying how society handles it. And so there's just this self-perpetuating cycle of quietness around it that doesn't allow it to get discussed. And so I think that's the more women are willing to tell their stories. Again, I would never push anybody into the spotlight. Never. I understand that it's a deeply personal decision and it has all kinds of things that go into it. But any woman that's willing to tell their story and can stand up and be like, yep, me, I had an abortion. Mm-hmm. That is me. And I am 100% okay with the choice that I made. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean that you don't have feelings about it. And it doesn't mean that it was an easy choice. But you know what else is an easy choice? To carry a life in the world that you aren't ready to have. And so that's not necessarily a better option. And when we look at women who have had abortions and versus women who haven't, meaning women who have been turned away from an abortion versus women who have women who have been able to get the abortion that they wanted to get, there's no difference in the mental health of the two. Like, I think a lot of people think that women who have had an abortion leave and then have all this regret. Statistics do not say that abortion is associated with regret. And statistics do not, and the data do not suggest that women who have had abortion are haunted by it and suffer severely for it for the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. And so I think if a woman can stand up and go like, look at me. I am not depressed. I am not in a worse place. In fact, turns out, and again, the data support this, I was able to get the education that I needed and have now been able to do what I wanted to do with my life. I've been able to find a partner that can support me versus one that wasn't supporting me and be forever tied to this human being for the rest of my life because I've had a child with them. Mm-hmm. So another really good book is The Turnaway Study by Diana Green Foster. And she did this study where she looked at longitudinally at these women who were either turned away from an abortion or were able to get an abortion and looked at what happened to them. 1,000 women and followed their stories over time to find out, is it is it detrimental to have an abortion, or is it detrimental to be turned away from an abortion and be forced to have a child that you were not intending to have? And what happens to you when that happens? And so I wish there was a way for people who have gone through that process to be able to be more public about it, because we would destigmatize it, and it would allow so much of that shame to be taken away. And also, when you think about too, what it takes to prevent we're so judgmental of when a person who becomes pregnant, it's a pregnancy that was unintended. But when you think about what has to happen for someone not to have a pregnancy, it's a lot. Like, so one, if you don't have healthcare, if you don't have insurance, you have to rely on drugstore methods to not get pregnant. And those are not the most reliable, even when used perfectly, which most of those are not used perfectly by most people in America. It has nothing to do with who you are as a human being, except for the fact that you are a human being. So even when used perfectly, the drugstore methods are not terribly reliable. They're not awful. They're much better than not being protected, but they're not terribly reliable. The really reliable methods require a doctor's appointment, which requires access to healthcare, which we are not very good at giving people in the United States. So unintended pregnancy really is a United States problem. It's not the individual woman who could not seem to prevent a pregnancy. But a woman from 18 to 45 years old, if she were to have sex on a regular basis for all of those years, I think that 18 pregnancies in her life she would have if she didn't try to prevent them. So let's think about if a woman from 18 to 45 years old wanted to avoid pregnancy and took a pill to do so. How many pills would she have to take from the ages of 18 to 45 to prevent one pregnancy? And you know what? I bet if we asked anybody, male, female, non-binary, I don't care who you are, I don't care how smart you are, I don't care what neighborhood you come from, if you ask them to take that many pills in their lifetime, they might miss one. It just might happen. So the fact that we're so judgmental of that, like, I'm sorry, like, I know no one who can do anything perfectly every day of their life forever. I know no one. So really, it's a very ridiculous discussion to say, like, to judge someone for getting pregnant when that wasn't their intention.
As a woman, I'm feeling so many feelings right now. For the most part, that all of what you just said, I'm fired up in the sense of the imperfection of being human. And let's just kind of like embolden that point, the imperfection of being human, and maybe missing that one pill, and then you get pregnant and you're too young and you just know you're not in the space to care for a child. Do we want, as a country, more children who are neglected, traumatized, brought into a system that they're not necessarily supported educationally in the healthcare system? I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And I want to also go back to that point of, you were saying statistically, or the longitudinal study of women being able to make that empowered choice to have an abortion versus being turned away. And what that does, I would say, probably to the shame in the body of being able or being turned away from making that empowered choice for yourself. But I kind of want to give you like an amen to everything that you just said, because it wasn't polarizing. You know, none of that to me felt divisive. It's just really, let's talk about that, people. Let's talk about the imperfection of being human. And also, let's talk about men as far as, you know, their part in the pregnancy process and how everything really, I mean, yes, there's condoms and yes, we have those prophylactics, but there's so much on the woman. And again, I just think it's like a whole system overhaul of education and we're not there. So to strip women of this right just feels barbaric and regressive, and as if we're going in the dark ages. Sorry if that was divisive, but yes. So,
and I think I wonder the people who are making these choices,
Mm-hmm.
what is their understanding of the issue? And I don't know the answer to that question. Like, can they sit down and can we have an educated discussion about what is driving them to make the choices that they're making? Like, just purely from like a science, logic standpoint. And that's where I think the discussions are lacking in America. Like, can I just try to understand you a little better and you try to understand me a little better? And can we have a discussion? Like, what science can you bring into this discussion as someone who, again, something that I got from Katie Watson's book about this whole idea of pro-choice, anti-choice, whatever. No one's pro-abortion, right? Like, no one's like, I really want. No, she makes the point in her book, like, no one's outside labor and delivery, like picketing, going, no more babies, no more babies. Like, no one pro-abortion.
Yeah.
We're pro-women's rights, like,
yes.
or pro-reproductive rights. And I would say that the other side is pro-fetal rights. Like, they're not, I think saying you're anti-choice is inflammatory and see how some of us feel. But in the discussion of it all, those are pro-fetal rights. And like, so make the pro-fetal right argument to me. And I just haven't heard it yet. And so maybe it exists, but I just haven't heard it yet. And so if someone can come to me and argue a good fetal right for me, like, then perhaps I can change my mind. The fetal right discussion hasn't been argued in a way, at least to me, that I'm like, oh, there's science and there's epidemiology and there's anything to back that up that tells me that we as a society are going to be better by withholding basic health. Abortion is not a political choice. A woman is not going to get an abortion because she's making holding her, just like you said, your friend was not holding her fist in the air being like, you know what, I'm going to go in this pregnancy because screw America. Like, it was not a political choice. She was making a healthcare choice.
Yes.
She was taking her body that was not in the state that she needed to be in to thrive and be okay, and returning it back to its normal state. Just like someone who goes and gets chemotherapy, or someone who has to go and take any sort of medicine or get surgery or get their abdomen open. And the other thing that's really crazy to me is that then we can go look at a fetal surgeon and fetal surgery, which I am part of and believe in and all that, that there are certain fetal surgery procedures where they will make a big laparotomy or big incision on a woman's abdomen and a big incision on her uterus and cut into her body to fix the fetus. The fetus gets fixed, but the woman's body then is damaged and hurt. Damaged is the wrong word, is altered. I don't want to say bad or good. It's altered. Her body is altered for the fetal rights. And so, like, we're living in a space right now where it gets all kinds of muddy and confusing. And so we have to be able to hold those paradoxes and be able to have these discussions in a way that's honoring what we're really talking about. And one of them is that we are holding the fetus and the rights of the fetus above that of the woman. Mm-hmm. And you can give me a good argument why we should do that, why that makes public health sense, why that makes political sense, why that makes anything but a religious or moral sense based on someone else's morals, then have at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I just couldn't agree more. That's really all that I want to say to that. It's yeah. I was just so tuned in as you were talking. And I mean, I guess one thing I would like to ask, and maybe I'm asking both of us, is before I move on to another question, how do we have these discussions? You know, how do we, coming full circle from the beginning with mass shootings and kind of feeling debilitated and grief and overwhelmed and just like the boat is sinking, to now, talking about the overturn of Roe v. Wade, but all of it is interconnected. And how do we, or is it impossible? Because it's starting to feel, if I'm to just be kind of direct and out there, it's starting to feel impossible. And yeah.
Well, I think for me, walking into these discussions, the one thing that I have to remember, or the many things I have to remember, is I am not responsible for what the other side does in their preparation for the discussion. So my only point being is all I can do is educate myself. Like I can't go and be like, other side, can you please go educate yourself? I would really love it if you would read this book and do this thing and do this research, like, and please do it in this way. Like I don't have any control over the other. I only have control over me. And I think I did an Instagram with our dear friend, Jen Passeloff, and we talked about the fact that I think knowledge is power across the board. And we can only fight with knowledge. We can't fight by raising our voices. We can't fight by stomping our feet. We can't fight by calling people names. We can't fight. We can fight by being knowledgeable and also understanding what we're arguing about, and also understanding and thinking about the language that we're using and how we're using it and what's really at stake. And so I would just say that people out there who want to engage in these discussions, go educate yourself as best you can. And I did it on Jen's Instagram, and I'm happy to tell you about those two books. And then there's something called the Guttmacher Institute that is just online that you can go on and get lots of information about all things reproduction. And so with statistics and understanding in more of a data-driven way versus in just opinion. And so I would say those are two or three really great places just to start, is just being able to come in. And when someone says, yeah, but people who have abortions are more likely to be depressed later on, which was an argument that has been made, or they're more likely to get cancer. They're more like, you can say, I'm sorry, that's inaccurate. Like you can point to knowledge. We cannot control how people respond to knowledge, but at least we're fighting with knowledge and not just, but I think this and I think this. Just going through and saying your belief systems is not going to help anything. That's like fighting over religion and politics and all the things that you're told by your mother not to fight at the dinner table. Like you're not going to get anywhere. But at least if you can come forth with a little bit of knowledge or a lot of bit of knowledge and dispel myths and dispel rumors, and that, you know what, do you know who has abortions? Everybody, every walk of life, every color has an abortion in America. Every religion has abortions in America. Every socioeconomic status has abortions in America. There is not a group of people who are the abortion seekers. Like we cannot look at like this demographic and be like, well, the abortion seekers are this age to this age, this color, this ethnicity, this neighborhood, there is no abortion seeker. It's everybody. And so I think just understanding that this is something that affects everybody, and also what it means to start turning people away, what's going to happen. 1 million women in America every year seek abortion. 1 million. Think about what that's going to do to our healthcare system. Wow. Think about that's a devastating number. A devastating number. And then think about the repercussions of that. Like, so we say that we start focusing on fetal rights. So what happens when, for instance, I have epilepsy. I take a medication. Fortunately, my medication is not teratogenic, but there are plenty of epilepsy or anti-epileptics that women don't have a choice, or people who have potential for reproduction don't have a choice but to take. So let's say I was on Dilantin and had to take that every single day. We know that has very serious fetal effects. And it was either I seize and get really ill, or I take this medicine, but I want to start a family. So I get pregnant knowing that I'm taking this medicine and my child has a severe birth defect. And if we're focusing on fetal rights, what happens to that child? And that is not a ridiculous, I think some people say that's out there. My stepmother in Indiana defended a woman who got pregnant and out of wedlock. And then ultimately her partner left her, and her culture was such that being unpartnered and pregnant was an atrocity. So she took rat poison, which is a blood thinner that crosses the placenta. And she was 32 weeks and the baby bled into its brain. She survived it. Her baby died, and she was put in jail for homicide. And my stepmom tried that case for the defendant, won, but when I talked to her recently, she's like, oh, that's just the tip of the iceberg, Whitney. Like
Wow.
What about women who drink and didn't know that they were pregnant? What about women who engage in any sort of activity that leads to fetal harm? If we're putting the rights of the fetus above the rights of the mother, then every choice a woman makes in pregnancy can land her in jail. And all those choices that doctors are making to help women in pregnancy by prescribing medications could lose their license. And that, I can tell you that's not, I think people think that's a very hyperbolic scenario, but it's not, because it's already happened.
It's already happened. Yeah. I don't think that's a hyperbolic scenario at all. And I'm really glad that you just brought all of that up, as I also got full body goosebumps as I was listening to that, because it's just so overwhelming, the direction that we're heading. And it brings me to, I want to be mindful of your time, but I do want to touch on, for you as a woman, power and powerlessness in your life. And I know this is kind of a large question, so you can answer it however you want to. In your own life, how have you felt a level of powerlessness? Or, in the episode before, I talked a lot about the insidiousness of the patriarchy, which I deeply believe in. And, for you, how have you stepped into your power as a woman? You can also just answer that. How have you in your life really made empowered choices for yourself and really being in that energy? Yeah.
Well, I just want to say that I'm so fortunate that I've had such amazing role models in my life. I have a mother who doesn't put up with a whole lot of anything. I mean, in a very good way. Like, she's always stood up for herself. And I've had stepmothers who are very powerful women. And I'm really fortunate in that. And I've had physician mentor role models so that's been modeled for me across the board. And so I've had coworkers both at Northwestern and at North Shore and in the military, when I was in the military, that are women that I can look at and just stand back and know that I can emulate and be so proud of, that I've watched. So I've watched their power, and have been able to understand what it means to harness it. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I think my focus is on the next generation. Like, I have 2 daughters, and I work with residents and medical students and fellows. And if we can exemplify power to them, then I think that's the best thing that we can do. I mean, not talk about it, but just show up and exemplify it, and just say, like, we are no longer going to put up with the patriarchy, and just speak up against it as much as we possibly can. I mean, I can't control the patriarchy. I can't make people any different than they are, but I can control myself, and I can control what I'm willing to listen to, abide to, when I'm going to stand up and interrupt, when I say no more. And that's all I can do. And I can vote. Mm-hmm. And so, and I can support the women around me and what they're doing. And so I think I don't have a magic answer. Like, I don't have like the one solution. I think it's how we live our lives and what we're willing to put up with, and what we're not willing to put up with. And it's by not, it was interesting a long time ago, and it doesn't really need to matter what place, because no one needs to be named in any way, shape, or form, but I was allowing someone else to not treat me well at work. Like, I wouldn't stand up for myself. I was being quiet. Gina, I hate conflict. I hate it. I'm bad at it. I don't like it. So I was like, all right, well, this person is not being very nice to me at work. And so I just going to put up with it, because it's better than the conflict I'm going to feel. And one of my senior people, someone senior to me, who was a man actually, brought me into his office and sat me down and said, all right, I'm upset about what I'm hearing about how you're being treated. And if you're not going to fight for yourself, that's one thing, but you have people that work with you that if you don't fight for yourself, what message are you sending? And there are people who, I don't like putting people in hierarchies. I want to say below me, but people who I have more power in the workplace than they do. And so by you allowing yourself to be walked on, you're allowing all of them to be walked on. And it wasn't until I was like, oh, this is not about me. Like that I really realized like I owe it to everybody to not allow myself to be walked on. I owe it to my daughters. I owe it to the people that I work with. I owe it to people above me. I owe it to people parallel with me. Like no one benefits from me being stepped on. No one, except for the person who's stepping. But everyone else loses. And so that was a really powerful lesson for me. And that like, by not stepping up and saying what I need, it's not just even about me. It's about everybody else around me. And so every time I start to like get conflict avoidant and get into my like, or even to, that do I deserve to say something? Am I enough?
Yep.
Am I worthy of asking for this thing that I think I deserve, but maybe I don't, or maybe I deserve to be treated that way. Maybe like when that starts to like sneak into my brain, I'm like, but everybody else doesn't deserve it. Like, so if I'm not going to fight for me, I can fight for everybody else. And I don't think I deserve it. I don't think anybody deserves it. But just when that little sneaky, as Jen would say, inner asshole voice shows up, I can combat it with, but what message am I giving my daughters? Yeah, but what message am I giving the residents and the med students and the fellows? What message am I giving for my coworkers and my colleagues? Like, I'm not helping anybody by being silent.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if we're to talk about, working, how do I want to say this? Like in unlearning of again, what I would say is the insidiousness of the patriarchy in all of us, standing in your voice, being in your, not being conflict avoidant, because as women, we've been so hardwired and trained to just be good, just look nice. Just look nice. If you look nice, maybe keep your mouth shut in big debates and conversations, so beautifully shared what you just said. I mean, just speaking your truth, standing up for yourself, not being stepped on, and leading by example. I think that, that's everything. That is, it's leaving the imprint on, as you're saying, and focusing on this generation below us to be in their power and to speak their truth and not be walked on is so important. So, yeah. Whitney. So, okay. I want to be very mindful of your time because you're a mother, a doctor, a writer. You've got lots of things going on in your life. And I'm just going to wrap up with my so-called rapid fire questions. You're like, oh God. And you can give quick responses if something really strikes you. So first one being, why do you think humans, why are we on this planet? And why are you here as Whitney You on this planet? What is your soul? Yeah. What are you meant to do? Why are you here?
I think we are on this planet to connect with each other, to be in communion, to be together. It doesn't have to be in large groups. Personally, I prefer it not be in large groups. My little introverted self, real happy in small groups, but I think connection and human connection is why we are here. And so why am I on this planet? Well, gosh, I mean, it's interesting. I was having a discussion with someone once about like, what is their purpose in life? And I was like, your purpose in life is different every day and every hour. Like, I feel like my purpose in life when I'm at work is to be a really good doctor and take really good care of my patients. And my purpose in life when I'm a mom is, there's so many purposes in being a mom, is to protect my children and love them well and model for them and snuggle with them. And like, but if I were to say like my unique purpose, again, it probably changes, but I also think it's connecting. Like I just love other souls. Like, and I don't mean like other people, like I love other souls. Like I love the conversations that you and I had with Jen's, or the conversation we're having now, is where I thrive.
Yeah.
Like the weather conversation, the big groups of people, that's just not my jam. But loving people well and being present with them, is my favorite thing ever. And so I think being present and, in that space as best I can is more and more becoming my purpose. I've had to let go of a lot of other purposes that involve the CV. And for a long time, I saw those as bullet points being my purpose, but now I think my purpose is just communing with other people and fully being present with them.
And I would just like to say to you, my experience with you and to everybody listening, at Jen's retreat, when we sat down and we were talking, I was asking you, about home births and hospital births. And I just really want to say it was such a beautiful moment of connection where I really felt heard by you, and there wasn't this divisive space of, now, Gina, don't go do that home birth. And, and you recently gave me the article that you wrote for the HuffPost, and, but the connection was so deep. And I really felt like our souls just kind of were on fire, talking about the things that we were passionate about, but you weren't polarizing in your discussion with me. And maybe if you're not, I remember you just saying, have a plan, Gina, have a really good plan. And I thought, so my soul wants to thank you for seeing me. Cause I think, going back to the basis of this whole conversation is, as souls, we want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be unconditionally loved. And that is really lacking these days. So anyways, thank you for being you and the big soul that you have. So my last couple questions are, what's a motto or something someone said to you? It could be a quote, could be, I have sentences that rattle in my brain that, like a mentor or teacher said to me, and they continue to kind of just pop out and guide me. Is there anything that you feel really guides you in your life?
Again, something that changes all the time. It's one of the reasons I like poetry. I can't write it worth anything. I think that poets are just, there's something magical in their brains and their souls that gets those poems out. I cannot write poetry. I wish I could, but I love reading it. Yeah. And so there's so many poems that I just think that strike me, and it depends on the day and what I'm grappling with, but that's kind of my church, that's my scripture. But in this moment, just the fact that you said it, was it Ram? No, we might have to fact check this. Okay. Is it my best friend every once in a while will just remind me that we're all just walking each other home.
Oh, Ram Dass.
Yeah. So I think it was Ram Dass. Yeah. And just when you asked me that question, that's the first thing that came to my mind, maybe because right now I think sanctuary and home and comfort is where my brain is, and we're all in community, and we're all just trying to, that's what we're trying to do. Yeah. So, you can never go wrong with little Ram Dass anyway, right? So.
No, are you kidding? Ram Dass is, he is, yes. Is big in my life. Interesting. And my son just kicked in my stomach as we were talking about, how interesting. Okay. And very last question. And this one, sometimes one of my girlfriends, she's a therapist. She was like, whoa, Gina, it's an intense question, but I think it's important. We're talking a lot in this conversation about life and death and coming into the world and leaving the world. And I think as Americans, by and large, we're very terrified to talk about death. Mm-hmm. We, in Buddhist culture and a lot of other places, it's open and it's part of life. But for you, what do you think happens after death? And
it's interesting because I clearly grapple with death, because when I was finishing up my MFA, I guess it was in the middle of my MFA, one of my mentors asked me to pull together all the essays I've written to that point. And I pulled them together, and not intentionally at all. They were all somehow about death. They, not even in a very specific way. Like one was about one of my cadavers in medical school, and one was about an autopsy, and one was about a baby that died, and was when my grandmother died. Like, but clearly grappling with something there. And I still haven't. So I guess my point is, I don't know. But the important thing is I spent a lot of my life needing to know, and probably a whole other discussion about religion and like some of the decisions I made trying to find certainty in my life until I had to let go of certainty and realize, again, somewhat Buddhist idea of the world of letting go and not needing to hold on. And I held on to certainty, even though it's just a big fat illusion. And so and including the illusion of what happens to you when you died. And I very much believe in heaven, and for a very long period of time in my life was fairly religious, and am not anymore. And in the process of becoming agnostic or whatever I am, as my kids say, Mom, can you be Christian, Jewish, or whatever you are? So like when I grow up, so I'm something undefined, which is fine. And that means that I don't know. I think something happens, but I don't know what it is. But I trust it.
Yeah. Oof. You trust it. Yeah. And the power of not knowing. And I think as humans, it's something my partner says to me, because the difference of the two of us, I mean, I'm such like I would say I'm going through a shift. I was a really hardcore seeker, spiritual seeker. And I went to all the retreats and all the different teachers and, delving into all the books. And now I'm just in this different space of just being and the not knowing and not trying to figure it all out, what it means to be human, why we're here. And kind of, I love the points that you brought up. Like it can change on the day or per day, what we believe in or what feels like a strong conviction. And yeah, the unknowns of the universe and the vastness of, I'm very skeptical of people who say, I know, right? They know what happens when a life enters or when a life leaves this planet. We don't actually. And I think that's also an important point of wrapping it up or bringing it full circle. So yeah, many unknowns. It was an honor, lovely, just mind expanding, soul expanding to have you on the show. And I just want to wrap up with, if there's anything that you want to share, or if you're just like, I'm good, it's up to you.
Well, just know that I love you, and I'm so glad we have this space together, and I'm so glad I've gotten to know you and meet you. And I look forward to our longitudinal relationship moving forward. And I think I just want right now to tell everyone, just take care of each other.
Oof.
Like, just take care of each other. And the things that you said, like see each other, take a moment to just hear, listen, see, and care for one another. Because that's really all we got. At the end of the day, that's all we have.
Yeah. There's too many friendships and families breaking apart from all of these issues that I think, just all to what you said, we need to see each other and hear each other and extend and radiate from a loving space. But it's a practice. And yeah, so thank you, Whitney. I'm going to let you go to your life and your children. And yeah, such an honor to have you on today.
Absolutely my pleasure and my honor. Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Hi, friends. If you have been enjoying Spaces Between, please take a moment to subscribe, and leaving a review is the cherry on top. Thank you so much, and I look forward to connecting with you next week.